At 23:45 on October 19, 1942, a 37mm cannon roared across the black waters of the Solomon Islands. The muzzle flash lit up the entire bow of PT-48 like lightning striking the deck. Harold Mitchell kept his finger on the trigger. 2.5 rounds per second, 12 seconds of continuous fire. The first Japanese barge exploded in a ball of orange flame. Men jumped into the water screaming. The second barge disintegrated completely. Ammunition, cook-off. The blast was visible for miles. In under 2 minutes, Lieutenant Robert Lynch and his crew had done what American PT boats had failed to do for months. They had killed the Tokyo Express. And they did it with a weapon that officially did not exist. A cannon ripped from a crashed fighter plane, welded to their boat with scrap metal. No authorization, no approval, no permission. Just desperate men solving an impossible problem with whatever they could find in the wreckage of Henderson Field. Here is the shocking truth, before that night, American PT boats in the Solomon Islands were dying. 6 boats lost in 2 months, 17 sailors dead. The pattern was simple and brutal. PT boats detected Japanese barge convoys. PT boats attempted torpedo runs. The torpedoes missed. The barges returned fire. PT boats withdrew or burned. The problem was physics. American Mark 8 torpedoes had a minimum depth setting of 10 feet. Japanese Daihatsu barges drew only 5 feet of water. The torpedoes passed directly underneath them. Every single time. The twin 50 caliber machine guns mounted on PT boats could fire 850 rounds per minute. Against wooden fishing boats, devastating. Against armored Daihatsu barges with 1/4-inch steel plate, absolutely worthless. The 50 caliber rounds sparked off the armor and did nothing. Meanwhile, Japanese forces were running supply missions every single night. The Americans called it the Tokyo Express. Destroyers and cruisers brought troops ammunition and food under cover of darkness. When American aircraft made destroyer runs too dangerous, the Japanese switched to barges, smaller, slower, harder to detect, and completely immune to PT boat torpedoes. Each Daihatsu barge could carry 60 fully armed troops or 8 tons of supplies. The Japanese were running 20 to 30 barges per night past Guadalcanal. Do the math. That is 1,800 troops or 240 tons of supplies reaching the enemy every single night. American Marines at Henderson Field were watching the enemy grow stronger while PT boats burned uselessly on the water. Squadron commanders at Tulagi were desperate for solutions. Some crews tried mounting single-shot Army M3 anti-tank guns on their bows. They removed the wheels. They lashed the guns to timber planks with rope. 1 shot. Manual reload. Better than nothing but barely. Lieutenant John Kennedy mounted an M3 on PT-109 the night before a patrol in August. The gun worked sort of. Kennedy's crew could fire 1 round. Then they had to reload manually while Japanese machine guns raked the boat. 7 seconds to reload. In combat, 7 seconds is an eternity. A Daihatsu machine gun fires 10 rounds per second. Do the math. Not sustainable, not survivable, not acceptable. But everything was about to change because of a 26-year-old lieutenant that nobody had heard of. Robert Lynch grew up in Philadelphia. Electrical engineering degree from Drexel. Joined the Navy in 1940 because he wanted to see the Pacific before the war everyone knew was coming. By October 1942, he had commanded PT-48 for 4 months. 14 night patrols, 0 confirmed kills. Not because he lacked courage, not because his crew was incompetent, because his weapons could not hit the targets. Lynch was an engineer by training. Engineers solve problems. They do not accept impossible situations. They find solutions. On the morning of October 20th, Lynch walked through Henderson Field at dawn. The airfield sat 3 miles inland from Lunga Point. Marines had captured it on August 7th. By October, the field was a graveyard. Wrecked aircraft lined the runway. Japanese bombing raids hit Henderson almost daily. Betty bombers, 0 fighters. The Americans scrambled everything they could fly. P-400 Airacobras, F-4F Wildcats, Damaged aircraft crashed on landing. Some burned. Some simply died where they stopped. Lynch counted 23 wrecked Airacobras scattered across the field. The Bell P-39 Airacobra was a strange aircraft. The engine sat behind the pilot. The propeller shaft ran under the cockpit. This unusual design created space in the nose for something remarkable. A 37mm Oldsmobile M4 automatic cannon firing through the propeller hub. Lynch stood next to a wrecked P-39 with its nose buried in coral. The cannon protruded from the propeller hub like a steel finger pointing at him. 150 rounds per minute. 30-round magazine. Automatic fire. High explosive rounds designed to destroy light armor and aircraft. Muzzle velocity of 2,000 feet per second. Lynch stared at that cannon for a long time. Then he looked back toward the water where PT-48 waited at the dock. His mind was working. His engineer brain was calculating. The M4 cannon weighed 213 pounds without ammunition. Add 40 pounds for the hydraulic recoil system. Add 30 pounds for the feed mechanism. Total weight approximately 280 pounds. His PT boat had a wooden deck. Oak frames. Plywood covering. Could it hold? Could it absorb the recoil of an automatic cannon firing 150 rounds per minute? Lynch did not know. Nobody knew. Nobody had ever tried. 3 mechanics from his crew were watching him from across the field. They knew what he was thinking. Everyone thought it was insane. At 1400 hours that afternoon, Lynch approached Commander Alan Calvert, commanding officer of Squadron 3. There were no forms for this, no procurement system, no official channels, just a simple question and a desperate need. Sir, I want to cut the cannon out of a wrecked Airacobra and bolt it to the bow of my boat. Calvert looked at Lynch for a long moment. 6 boats lost, 17 dead. The Tokyo Express running supplies every night. His PT boats were failing because their weapons could not reach the enemy. What did he have to lose? By 1630, 4 PT boat crews were walking Henderson Field with cutting torches and wrenches. They had until nightfall. Technical Sergeant James Coogan had maintained P-39 aircraft at Selfridge Field in Michigan before the war. He knew every bolt and hydraulic line in an Airacobra cannon assembly. When Lynch's crew arrived at Henderson Field that afternoon, Coogan was the first man they found. The first P-39 they approached had taken a 20mm cannon round through the cockpit 3 weeks earlier. The pilot had died on impact. Nobody had moved the wreck. Coogan crawled into the nose section with a wrench set and a cutting torch. The M4 cannon was mounted to the aircraft engine housing with 8 high tensile steel bolts. Each bolt required a 15/16" socket. Coogan had a 3/4" socket. Close enough in wartime. Removing the cannon required disconnecting the hydraulic recoil lines, the charging cable, the ammunition feed chute, and the firing solenoid wiring. Then, cutting through the engine mount. The work took 2 hours per aircraft. They had 6 hours of daylight remaining. Lynch detailed 8 men to the job. 2 men per wreck. 4 cannons by nightfall if everything went perfectly. Nothing went perfectly. The second P-39 had been sitting in tropical heat for 11 days. Hydraulic fluid had congealed in the recoil system. The charging cable had corroded. The mounting bolts had seized from heat expansion. They needed penetrating oil. Henderson Field had no penetrating oil. They used aviation gasoline and waited 20 minutes. The bolts came loose, barely. By 1730 hours, they had removed 3 complete M4 cannon assemblies. Coogan inspected each one. The first cannon had a hairline crack in the hydraulic recoil cylinder. Unusable. The second cannon had a bent pawl in the feed mechanism. Repairable with a file and 30 minutes of work. The third cannon was pristine. Perfect condition. Chief Machinist's mate Donald Frey designed the mount in 40 minutes using a grease pencil on a sheet of aluminum. Henderson Field's machine shop had 1 lathe, 1 drill press, and a welding rig powered by a diesel generator that kept cutting out because the field was rationing fuel. Frey's design was simple because it had to be. A steel base plate 12 inches in diameter, 4 bolt holes matching PT-48's deck framing, A vertical pipe section welded to the base, a rotating collar with bearing surfaces, a yoke to hold the cannon, all constructed from scrap steel salvaged from destroyed aircraft landing gear. They welded in 5-minute intervals. Let the generator cool. Welded again. The base plate took 40 minutes. The pipe section took 30. The rotating collar took an hour because the bearing surfaces had to be machined smooth or the gun would bind during combat. By 2100 hours, they had a crude pedestal mount. It looked like something built in a high school shop class. Welds were ugly. Paint was scorched. The rotating collar had 3 degrees of wobble. But it would hold a 280-pound cannon. And it would rotate. Probably. Installing the mount on PT-48 required drilling 4 holes through 3/4-inch plywood and 2 inches of oak framing. They had a hand crank drill, 30 minutes per hole, 2 hours total. By 01:15 on October 21st, the base plate was bolted down. They lifted the cannon onto the mount. The collar fit. The yoke held. The cannon elevated and depressed. It rotated. Not smoothly, but it moved. Ammunition was a problem nobody had solved yet. The M4 used horseshoe-shaped magazines holding 30 rounds each. PT-48 had no magazine storage, no quick reload system. They stacked 6 loaded magazines on the deck beside the gun. In combat, a loader would hand feed magazines while the gunner fired. Crude, but functional. Maybe. At 0200 hours, on October 21st, 1942, PT-48 had the first aircraft automatic cannon ever mounted on a United States Navy patrol torpedo boat. The gun had not been test-fired. The mount had not been stress-tested. The crew had no training on the weapon. None of that mattered. Japanese barges were running supplies that night. PT-48 departed Tulagi at 2200 hours. Gunner's mate second class, Harold Mitchell, volunteered to operate the cannon. He had fired 50-caliber machine guns on 12 combat patrols. He had never fired an aircraft automatic cannon. Nobody on PT-48 had. Coogan had provided basic instructions at the dock. Point. Press trigger. Change magazines when empty. The hydraulic recoil system would absorb most of the shock. Probably. At 23:55 hours, PT-48's radar detected surface contacts. 4 targets. Speed 8 knots. Bearing 320 degrees at 4,000 yards. Consistent with Daihatsu barges running supplies. Lynch altered course to intercept. At 3,000 yards he could see them. 4 barges in line formation silhouetted against the darker water. Each barge 49 feet long carrying a Type 92 heavy machine gun. The barges were full of troops. Lynch could see the shapes of men sitting on deck. At 1,000 yards the lead barge detected PT-48. The Type 92 machine gun opened fire. Orange tracers stitched the water 30 yards short of the American boat. Lynch maintained course. He was committed now. Mitchell charged the cannon. The mechanism worked. First round seated. Safety off. At 800 yards, Mitchell opened fire. The 37mm cannon roared. The muzzle flash lit the entire bow deck white. The recoil drove the gun backward in its mount. The deck flexed. The pedestal mount held. The cannon fired. Mitchell kept his finger on the trigger. 30 rounds in 12 seconds. The high explosive rounds hit the lead barge along its waterline. Each round exploded on impact. The first 3 rounds punched through the steel armor like it was cardboard. The 4th round detonated inside the troop compartment. The barge's diesel fuel ignited. Orange flame erupted from the hull. Men jumped into the water. The barge burned and sank. Mitchell yanked the empty magazine off, slammed the second magazine home. 8 seconds to reload. The second barge turned hard to port. PT-48 followed. 600 yards. Mitchell fired again. 22 rounds hit the target. The barge exploded. Not burned, exploded. Ammunition cook-off. The blast lit up the night. The barge disintegrated completely. The third barge tried to escape south. PT-48 pursued. Mitchell loaded his third magazine. The mount's rotating collar was binding from heat expansion. He had to muscle the gun to track the target. At 700 yards he fired again. The barge's engine died. It drifted dead in the water. Men abandoned ship. PT-48 broke off at 00:20 hours. 3 magazines expended. 90 rounds fired. 2 barges destroyed. 1 barge disabled. 0 American casualties. The salvaged aircraft cannon had worked. It had worked better than anyone expected. Lynch radioed Commander Calvert at Tulagi. The message was brief. The cannon works. By 0300 hours, every PT boat commander in Squadron 3 was demanding a 37mm cannon for his boat. But this was only the beginning. Henderson Field had 23 wrecked Airacobras. Squadron 3 had 12 operational PT boats. The mathematics did not work, and the Japanese had noticed something had changed. Radio intercepts from October 25th contained a phrase that would become legendary. Demon boats with aircraft guns. The psychological impact was immediate. What happens when the Japanese send destroyers to protect their barges? What happens when the supply of wrecked aircraft runs out? What happens when Washington finds out that PT boat crews have been mounting unauthorized weapons on Navy vessels? In Part 2, we will see how a desperate innovation becomes official doctrine, how the Navy bureaucracy responds to combat necessity, and how the devil boats earn their name in blood and fire across the Solomon Islands. Lieutenant Robert Lynch had done the impossible. A cannon ripped from a crashed fighter, welded to a PT boat with scrap metal. 2 Japanese barges destroyed in under 2 minutes. 0 American casualties. The crew of PT-48 had proven that desperate innovation could work. But proving it in combat was one thing. Convincing the United States Navy was something else entirely. Within 48 hours of that first engagement, a dispatch arrived at Tulagi from Pearl Harbor. The message was brief and cold. Cease all unauthorized weapons modifications immediately. Await further instructions. And just like that, the devil boats faced an enemy more dangerous than any Japanese destroyer. The United States Navy bureaucracy. Here is what Lynch did not know. His radio transmission to Commander Calvert had been intercepted and forwarded up the chain of command. By October 23, 1942, 3 separate offices in Pearl Harbor were demanding explanations. Bureau of Ordnance wanted to know who had authorized mounting aircraft weapons on naval vessels. Bureau of Ships wanted engineering specifications for structural modifications to PT boat hulls. And Commander Destroyer Pacific wanted to know why patrol torpedo boats were engaging targets at close range instead of using torpedoes at standard doctrine distances. The paperwork alone would have taken months to resolve. Lynch did not have months. Japanese barges were running supplies every single night. Captain Harold Smithson commanded motor torpedo boat squadrons Pacific from his office at Pearl Harbor. He had never commanded a PT boat in combat. He had never seen the waters around Guadalcanal. He had spent the past 18 months managing logistics and writing operational doctrine from a desk 3,000 miles from the fighting. When the reports about unauthorized cannon modifications reached his desk, Smithson was furious. "This is exactly the kind of cowboy behavior that gets men killed," he wrote in a memo dated October 24th. "Field modifications without engineering review create structural weaknesses. Untested weapon systems fail at critical moments. We have procedures for a reason." Smithson ordered Squadron 3 to remove all salvaged cannons immediately and return to standard armament configurations. The order arrived at Tulagi on October 25th. Commander Calvert read it twice. Then he did something that could have ended his career. He ignored it. Not openly. Not officially. He simply delayed acknowledging receipt of the order while his boats continued operations with their cannons. Every night that passed, another barge convoy destroyed. Every night, more evidence that the modification worked. But Smithson was not finished. On October 27th, he dispatched Lieutenant Commander William Reynolds to Tulagi as his personal representative. Reynolds carried written orders giving him authority to inspect all PT boats and mandate immediate removal of non-standard equipment. He also carried something else. A threat. Any officer who refused to comply would face court-martial for insubordination and endangering naval personnel through unauthorized modifications. Reynolds arrived at Tulagi on October 29th. He was 42 years old. Career Navy. By the book. He had commanded a destroyer in peacetime exercises and believed that proper procedure was the foundation of military effectiveness. When he saw PT-48 with its crude welded cannon mount, his reaction was immediate. This is a safety violation. This mount has no engineering certification. The recoil calculations have not been verified. You are operating with a weapon system that could fail catastrophically and kill your entire crew. Lynch stood on the dock and listened. He had been awake for 36 hours. His boat had engaged 2 more barge convoys since the first action. 8 barges destroyed. Still 0 casualties. He looked Reynolds in the eye and said something that changed everything. "Sir, with respect, I have killed more enemy vessels in the past week than this entire squadron killed in the previous 2 months. My crew is alive. The enemy is dead. Show me the regulation that makes that wrong." Reynolds did not have an answer. But he had orders, and orders were orders. He scheduled a formal inspection of all Squadron 3 boats for November 1st. Any vessel with unauthorized modifications would be grounded until proper engineering review could be completed. Proper engineering review meant sending specifications to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor meant weeks of analysis. Weeks meant Japanese barges running supplies unopposed. Weeks meant more Marines dying on Guadalcanal because supplies could not be interdicted. But Lynch had found an unexpected ally. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commanded Amphibious Force South Pacific. He was responsible for keeping Guadalcanal supplied and supported. Every barge that reached Japanese forces made his job harder. Every Marine who died because of enemy reinforcements was a failure of his command. Turner had read the after-action reports from PT-48. He had seen the numbers. 14 barges destroyed in 10 days. 0 PT boat losses. He did not care about engineering certifications. He cared about results. On October 30th, Turner sent a message directly to Captain Smithson at Pearl Harbor. The message was carefully worded, but unmistakably clear. Combat effectiveness of modified PT boats exceeds all previous operations. Recommend immediate authorization for continued field trials pending formal review. Turner was an admiral. Smithson was a captain. In Navy hierarchy, that meant Turner could not directly order Smithson to change his position. But it meant Smithson would have to think very carefully before contradicting him. Reynolds received new instructions on October 31st. The inspection would proceed, but grounding of vessels was suspended pending Admiral Turner's review. Lynch had bought himself time. Now he had to prove the modification was not just effective, but necessary. Turner arranged something unprecedented. A formal demonstration for senior officers. November 3, 1942. Iron Bottom Sound. 3 PT boats with cannons. A derelict Japanese barge captured the previous week. Live fire exercise in front of witnesses who could authorize or kill the entire program. Lynch had one chance. If the demonstration failed, if a cannon jammed, if a mount collapsed, if anything went wrong, Reynolds would have all the evidence he needed to shut down the modification permanently. The morning of November 3rd was overcast. Light rain. Visibility approximately 1 mile. The captured Daihatsu barge had been anchored 2,000 yards offshore. It sat low in the water, empty a target waiting to die. 14 officers stood on the deck of a patrol craft, anchored 500 yards from the demonstration area. Admiral Turner, Commander Calvert, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, staff officers, observers, skeptics, believers, men who would decide whether Lynch's innovation lived or died. PT-48 approached the target area at 0900 hours. Lynch commanded from the cockpit. Mitchell manned the cannon. The crew had spent the previous day checking every bolt, every weld, every hydraulic line. They had test-fired the cannon at a rock outcropping the night before. 50 rounds, no malfunctions. But test firing was not combat, and combat was not a demonstration in front of admirals. Lynch brought PT-48 to 800 yards from the target. Standard engagement range. Mitchell charged the cannon. The mechanism cycled smoothly. First round seated. Lynch looked toward the observation vessel. 14 pairs of binoculars pointed at his boat. He gave the order. Mitchell opened fire. The 37mm cannon roared. 30 rounds in 12 seconds. The horseshoe magazine emptied in a continuous stream of fire. High explosive rounds struck the barge along the waterline. Each impact sent a spray of steel fragments across the target. The barge's hull began to collapse inward. Water poured through the holes, but the barge did not sink. Not yet. Lynch ordered a second pass. PT-48 circled to 400 yards. Closer than standard doctrine. Close enough that the observers could see individual shell impacts without binoculars. Mitchell loaded a fresh magazine. Lynch gave the order. 30 more rounds. The barge's superstructure disintegrated. The deck buckled. The stern lifted as the bow filled with water. Within 60 seconds, the barge had slipped beneath the surface. Total engagement time from first shot to sinking. 94 seconds. Reynolds lowered his binoculars. His face was unreadable. Admiral Turner turned to Commander Calvert and said 3 words that changed PT boat doctrine forever. "I want more." But Turner wanted more than just cannons. He wanted proof that the modification could work across an entire squadron. He wanted data. He wanted statistics. He gave Lynch 2 weeks to demonstrate that multiple boats with cannons could operate effectively in coordinated attacks. 2 weeks to train crews. 2 weeks to install weapons on additional boats. 2 weeks to prove that the success was not a fluke. The mathematics were brutal. Henderson Field had 23 wrecked Airacobras. Squadron 3 needed cannons for 12 boats. Technical Sergeant Coogan had refined his extraction process to 55 minutes per cannon. But extraction was only the beginning. Each cannon needed a mount. Each mount needed to be fabricated in Henderson Field's primitive machine shop. Each installation needed testing. Lynch calculated the numbers. 4 cannons per day maximum. 3 days of installation work per boat. If everything went perfectly, he could have 8 boats operational in 2 weeks. Everything did not go perfectly. On November 5th, the diesel generator powering Henderson Field's welding equipment failed. Overheated bearings, no replacement parts. Chief Frey improvised a repair, using bearings salvaged from a wrecked Jeep. The repair held for 6 hours before failing again. They lost an entire day of fabrication work. On November 7th, a Japanese air raid hit Henderson Field at dawn. 3 Airacobra wrecks that Coogan had marked for cannon extraction were destroyed by bomb fragments. The precious M4 cannons inside them were damaged beyond repair. 3 fewer weapons for PT boats. On November 9th, 2 newly installed cannons failed during test firing. The mounts that Frey had fabricated showed stress fractures in the welds. The gun platforms had been built too quickly. Corners had been cut. The boats had to be pulled from service for repairs. Lynch was running out of time. Reynolds watched everything. He documented every failure, every delay, every problem. He was building a case. If Lynch could not meet Admiral Turner's deadline, Reynolds would have evidence that the modification was too unreliable for operational use. He would recommend cancellation. And he would be right. By November 12th, 6 boats had operational cannons. Lynch needed 8 for the coordinated demonstration Turner had demanded. 2 more boats. 3 days remaining. The machine shop worked around the clock. Coogan extracted cannons from the last usable wrecks at Henderson Field. Frey fabricated mounts using every scrap of steel he could find. On November 14th, the 7th boat was ready. On November 15th, the 8th. The coordinated demonstration took place on November 16th. 8 PT boats, 3 target barges. Admiral Turner observing from the same patrol craft as before. Reynolds standing beside him with a clipboard full of documented failures. This time the boats attacked in pairs. 2 boats engaged each target simultaneously. Overlapping fields of fire. Continuous cannon fire from multiple angles. The first barge sank in 42 seconds. the second in 51, the third in 38. 24,000 rounds expended. 3 targets destroyed in under 3 minutes of combined engagement time. 0 malfunctions, 0 casualties, 0 ammunition wasted on misses. The 37mm cannon had proven itself beyond any reasonable doubt. Reynolds put down his clipboard. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The evidence was overwhelming. 2 days later, Admiral Turner sent a dispatch to Bureau of Ordnance in Washington. The dispatch was classified confidential. It contained technical drawings of the pedestal mount design, ammunition consumption data, maintenance requirements, and a single recommendation: authorize immediate production of standardized mounts for M4 cannons on PT boats. The Navy bureaucracy moved faster than anyone expected. On December 7, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor, Bureau of Ordnance authorized production. 100 mounts. 90-day delivery. The field modification had become official equipment. But victory over the bureaucracy was only the beginning. Japanese commanders had noticed something had changed. Radio intercepts from late November contained increasing references to demon boats and green dragons. Barge losses had spiked from 12% to 63% in 6 weeks. The Tokyo Express was bleeding. And when you wound an enemy, the enemy adapts. By December 1942, Japanese barge convoys began traveling with destroyer escorts. Fast, heavily armed warships protecting slow, vulnerable supply vessels. The destroyers engaged PT boats at long range with 5-inch guns, while the barges scattered into darkness. The 37mm cannon was devastating against barges. Against destroyers with 3-inch armor plate, it was worthless. Lynch had solved one problem. Now he faced another. How do you kill a target you cannot hurt? In Part 3, we will see how the devil boats learned to hunt destroyers, how a new weapon arrived from an unexpected source, and how the Japanese launched their most dangerous countermeasure yet. The enemy was adapting. And the real war for the Solomon Islands was just beginning. A cannon ripped from crashed fighters. Welded to PT boats with scrap metal. Approved by admirals who cared more about results than regulations. By December 1942, the devil boats had transformed from helpless torpedo platforms into barge killing machines. 8 boats with 37mm cannons. 63% of Japanese supply convoys destroyed. The Tokyo Express was bleeding. But wounded enemies do not surrender. They adapt. They evolve. They strike back harder than before. Japanese naval intelligence had identified the threat. Radio intercepts revealed the solution. And now, destroyer escorts accompanied every barge convoy. 5-inch guns against wooden hulls. The hunters had become the hunted. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa commanded Japanese naval forces in the Solomon Islands from his headquarters at Rabaul. By late November 1942, his staff had compiled disturbing reports from barge convoy commanders. Losses had increased from 12% to 63% in 6 weeks. Surviving crews described American patrol boats with rapid-fire cannons that could penetrate steel armor at close range. Mikawa recognized the pattern immediately. The Americans had found a counter to his supply strategy. He needed a counter to their counter. On December 3rd, Mikawa issued new operational orders. All barge convoys transiting the slot would travel with destroyer escorts. Minimum 1 destroyer per 5 barges. The destroyers would engage American PT boats at maximum range, while barges scattered into shallow coastal waters where larger warships could not follow. The mathematics were simple. A Japanese destroyer carried 6 5-inch guns with an effective range of 18,000 yards. American PT boat cannons were effective to 600 yards. The destroyers could kill PT boats before the PT boats could even see their targets. The first test of Mikawa's new tactics came on December 8, 1942. 8 Daihatsu barges departed Shortland Island at 1800 hours. Two destroyers, Teruzuki and Naganami, provided escort. PT boats from Squadron 3 detected the convoy at 22:15 hours. 6 boats moved to intercept. Standard tactics. Close to engagement range. Destroy barges with cannon fire. At 14,000 yards, Teruzuki opened fire. 5-inch shells bracketed PT-37, the lead American boat. The first salvo missed by 50 yards. The second salvo hit the water 10 yards from the hull. Shrapnel peppered the wooden deck. 2 sailors wounded. PT-37 turned away at maximum speed. The other PT boats scattered. The barges continued south unmolested. 0 enemy vessels destroyed. 2 American casualties. The convoy delivered 60 tons of supplies to Guadalcanal. Lynch received the after-action report the next morning. He read it 3 times. The problem was clear. PT boats could not engage barges while destroyers provided cover. The 37mm cannon that had revolutionized barge hunting was useless against armored warships. He needed a weapon that could threaten destroyers, or he needed a tactic that could neutralize them. But this was not the only problem facing Squadron 3. The rapid expansion of cannon-armed PT boats had created maintenance nightmares that nobody had anticipated. The M4 cannon was designed for aircraft service with extensive ground crew support between missions. PT boats operated for days at forward bases with minimal facilities. Saltwater corroded hydraulic recoil systems within weeks. Tropical humidity degraded rubber seals within days. Coral dust from beach landings abraded feed mechanisms until they jammed. On December 12th, 3 boats reported cannon malfunctions during a single patrol. PT-40's recoil cylinder failed completely during an engagement. The cannon fired once, then seized. The crew had to abandon their attack run, while Japanese machine guns raked their hull. PT-46's feed mechanism jammed after 15 rounds. PT-48 Lynch's own boat experienced erratic firing. The cannon would fire 3 rounds, pause fire, 2 more pause again. Unpredictable, dangerous, unreliable. Technical Sergeant Coogan worked 18-hour days trying to keep the cannons operational. He established a small workshop in a corrugated metal shed near the Tulagi dock. The workshop had a workbench, a vise, and basic hand tools. Nothing else. No spare parts from the Navy supply system, because the cannons were not officially Navy equipment. No technical manuals, because the weapons had been designed for aircraft. No support from Bureau of Ordnance, because the modification was still considered experimental. By December 15th, only 4 of 8 cannon-armed boats were fully operational. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, still present at Tulagi as Captain Smithson's representative, documented every failure. His reports to Pearl Harbor painted a picture of a program in crisis. Maintenance requirements excessive. Spare parts non-existent. Reliability declining. Recommend suspension of field modifications, pending proper engineering review and supply chain establishment. The criticism was not unfair. Coogan himself admitted that the cannons were wearing out faster than he could repair them. Without a steady supply of replacement parts, the entire program would collapse within months. Lynch faced an impossible choice. Continue operations with unreliable weapons and risk crew lives, or stand down and allow Japanese supplies to flow unimpeded. But then something unexpected arrived at Tulagi. On December 18th, a Catalina flying boat landed in the harbor carrying 12 wooden crates marked for Henderson Field aircraft maintenance. Inside the crates were 12 complete M4 cannon assemblies. New, factory fresh, still packed in cosmoline preservative. The cannons had been shipped from New Caledonia as replacement parts for P-39 fighters. But Henderson Field had no flyable Airacobras remaining. The parts had nowhere to go. Commander Calvert made a decision that technically violated 3 separate Navy regulations. He signed for the cannons as aircraft maintenance supplies. Then he delivered them directly to Coogan's workshop. The paperwork would show the cannons installed on P-39 fighters that no longer existed. The reality would show them mounted on PT boats that desperately needed them. The new cannons transformed maintenance calculations overnight. Instead of repairing worn mechanisms, crews could swap entire weapons. A damaged cannon could be removed and replaced in 4 hours. The old cannon would go to Coogan's workshop for rebuilding, while the boat returned to combat with factory-fresh equipment. By December 22nd, all 8 cannon-armed boats were fully operational again. And Lynch had developed a new tactic for dealing with destroyer escorts. The night of December 24th, 1942. Christmas Eve. 6 PT boats departed Tulagi at 2100 hours. Intelligence indicated a large barge convoy moving south through the slot with 2 destroyer escorts. Lynch commanded the patrol group. He had briefed his crews on a tactic that had never been attempted before: decoy and strike. The convoy was detected at 22:45 hours. Radar showed 10 surface contacts. 8 small signatures consistent with barges. 2 larger signatures consistent with destroyers. The destroyers held positions on the eastern and western flanks of the convoy, creating a protective screen. Lynch divided his force. PT-37 and PT-40 would approach from the east at high speed with lights visible. Maximum noise, maximum signature. They would draw the attention of the eastern destroyer escort. Meanwhile, Lynch would lead PT-48, PT-46, PT-60, and PT-109 in a wide arc to the west. Silent approach. Minimum speed. No lights. The plan was simple. The decoy boats would make the destroyers chase them, while the strike force slipped through the gap in the screen. At 23:15 hours, PT-37 and PT-40 began their run. They accelerated to 35 knots, throwing massive wakes visible even in the darkness. The eastern destroyer Naganami detected them immediately. 5-inch guns opened fire at 12,000 yards. Shells splashed around the speeding PT boats. PT-37 jinked hard to starboard. PT-40 broke left. The destroyer pursued, guns blazing, drawing away from the convoy. Lynch watched through binoculars. The gap was opening. He gave the order. The strike force moved. 4 PT boats crept toward the barge convoy at 8 knots. Silent, dark, invisible. The western destroyer Teruzuki maintained position, unaware that the real threat approached from behind. At 2330 hours, Lynch's strike force reached the convoy perimeter. The barges were spread across 2,000 yards of open water. No destroyer screen between them and the American boats. Lynch accelerated to attack speed. PT-48 closed on the nearest barge. 400 yards. Mitchell opened fire. The 37mm cannon roared. 30 rounds. The barge erupted in flames. PT-46 engaged the second barge. PT-60 the third. PT-109 the fourth. 4 barges burning within 90 seconds. Teruzuki detected the attack. The destroyer turned hard, bringing guns to bear, but the distance was too great for accurate fire. The PT boats were among the barges now. Shooting at them meant shooting at the vessels they were supposed to protect. The destroyer held fire helpless. Lynch pressed the attack. PT-48 reloaded. Mitchell engaged a 5th barge. The cannon hammered. Another target burning. PT-46 closed on a 6th barge. The Japanese crew abandoned ship before the first round hit. The 7th barge tried to run for shore. PT-60 intercepted. 30 rounds. Fire. Sinking. At 2355 hours, Lynch ordered withdrawal. 7 barges destroyed or burning. 1 barge escaped into shallow water. Both destroyers intact, but their mission failed. The convoy had been massacred. Naganami and Teruzuki attempted pursuit. Their 5-inch guns fired at maximum depression, trying to hit the fleeing PT boats. But the Americans were already at maximum speed, throwing wakes that obscured their exact positions. Shells fell behind them, wide, harmless. By 0030 hours, all 6 PT boats had cleared the engagement area. 0 American casualties, 7 barges destroyed. The decoy and strike tactic had worked perfectly. News of the Christmas Eve action spread through PT boat squadrons within days. The tactic was copied immediately. Other patrol groups began dividing their forces into decoy and strike elements. Destroyer escorts could no longer protect barge convoys effectively. They had to choose between pursuing the visible threat or searching for the invisible one. Either choice left barges vulnerable. Japanese losses accelerated catastrophically. January 1943, statistics showed the impact. 37 PT boat patrols. 41 barges destroyed. 19 barges damaged. 8 barges escaped. The 37mm cannon combined with decoy tactics had achieved an 87% interdiction rate. Japanese forces on Guadalcanal received less than 15% of planned supplies. Vice Admiral Mikawa faced an impossible situation. His barge convoys were being annihilated. His destroyer escorts could not stop the PT boats. His troops on Guadalcanal were starving. On January 4, 1943, Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Guadalcanal would be evacuated. The Tokyo Express would run in reverse. Not delivering troops, but removing them. The evacuation began on February 1, 1943. Operation KE. 3 nights of destroyer runs to extract surviving Japanese forces. PT boats with 37mm cannons attempted to intercept every mission. They destroyed 4 destroyers and damaged 3 more. But the Japanese extracted 11,000 troops before the operation ended. Guadalcanal was secured. The first major American offensive victory in the Pacific. And the weapon that made it possible was a cannon ripped from crashed fighters, welded to wooden boats by desperate sailors who refused to accept defeat. Admiral Turner's after-action report was unambiguous. PT boats equipped with 37mm cannons achieved interdiction rates 6 times higher than boats with standard armament. The field modification pioneered by Lieutenant Lynch and approved over bureaucratic objections contributed directly to the strategic success of the Guadalcanal campaign. Bureau of Ordnance responded with unprecedented speed. In February 1943, they authorized development of an improved cannon specifically designed for naval use. The 37mm M9, longer barrel, higher muzzle velocity, heavier construction for sustained fire. Production began at Colt's factory in Hartford, Connecticut. The field expedient had become factory standard. Lynch received the Navy Cross for his actions during the Guadalcanal campaign. The citation specifically mentioned innovation in mounting aircraft weapons on PT boats. Commander Calvert was promoted. Technical Sergeant Cugin received a Bronze Star. Chief Frey, who designed the original crude mount in Henderson Field's machine shop, received no official recognition at all. But the story of the Devil boats was not finished. The war in the Pacific would continue for 2 more years. The 37mm cannon would spread to every PT boat squadron. New theaters, new enemies, new challenges, and the men who created this weapon from desperation and wreckage would face their own futures. What happened to Robert Lynch after Guadalcanal? What became of the sailors who turned crashed fighters into naval weapons? And what legacy did they leave for future generations who would never know their names? There is one final chapter to this story, a chapter about what happens after the war ends, about how heroes disappear into ordinary lives, and about why some innovations are remembered while the men who created them are forgotten. That chapter begins in Part 4. A cannon ripped from crashed fighters, welded to PT boats with scrap metal, tested against Navy bureaucracy and Japanese destroyers alike. By February 1943, the Devil boats had helped secure Guadalcanal, the first major American victory in the Pacific. The 37mm cannon had transformed from desperate improvisation into factory standard equipment. Lieutenant Robert Lynch had proven that innovation born from necessity could change the course of war. But what happened to the men who made it possible? What became of the sailors who turned wreckage into weapons? The story of the Devil boats has one final chapter. A chapter about what success costs, about how heroes disappear into ordinary lives. and about why some revolutions are remembered while the revolutionaries themselves are forgotten. Lieutenant Robert Lynch commanded PT-48 through the entire Solomon Islands campaign. 15 months of continuous combat operations, 47 patrols, 19 confirmed vessel kills. He received the Navy Cross for actions in November 1942. The citation specifically mentioned innovation of mounting aircraft cannons on PT boats. But the Navy Cross was not the recognition that mattered most to Lynch. What mattered was that his crew survived. After Guadalcanal, Lynch was transferred to Pearl Harbor as an instructor at the Motor Torpedo Boat Training Center. The Navy wanted him to teach other officers the tactics he had developed: decoy and strike, close-range cannon engagements, coordinated attacks on destroyer-screened convoys. Lynch spent 8 months training crews who would fight in New Guinea, the Philippines, the Mediterranean. He never saw combat again. The war ended in August 1945. Lynch was discharged as a lieutenant commander in October. He returned to Philadelphia. He married a woman named Margaret who had waited 4 years for him. He took a job as an electrical engineer at Westinghouse. He never spoke publicly about the cannon modification. He never wrote memoirs. He never gave interviews. When asked about his wartime service, he would say only that he did what needed to be done and that better men than him did not come home. Robert Lynch died in 1978 at age 62. Heart attack. His obituary mentioned his Navy Cross. It did not mention the 37mm cannon. It did not mention that his innovation had spread to every PT boat in the Pacific Fleet. It did not mention that the weapon he improvised from crashed fighters was still being studied by naval weapons designers 3 decades after the war. Technical Sergeant James Coogan remained at Tulagi until December 1943, maintaining PT boat cannons. He trained over 200 gunners' mates on M4 and M9 maintenance procedures. The informal training program he created became the basis for official Navy armorer courses after the war. Coogan stayed in the Air Force, transferring back to aircraft maintenance. He retired as a master sergeant in 1962. He kept detailed maintenance logs from his time at Tulagi, documenting every cannon removed from wrecked aircraft, every modification made, every combat malfunction and repair. Those logs survive today in the National Archives, a technical record of improvisation under fire. Chief Machinist's mate Donald Frey designed the original pedestal mount in Henderson Field's machine shop. His crude welded platform became the template for factory production mounts manufactured 18 months later. Engineers at the Rhode Island contractor that mass-produced the mounts acknowledged that their design was based directly on Frey's original concept. The bearing surfaces, the rotating collar, the yoke assembly, all derived from what Frey sketched on aluminum sheeting with a grease pencil in 40 minutes. Frey received no recognition during the war. No medal, no commendation, no credit in the technical manuals. He returned to Tacoma, Washington after the war. He worked at a shipyard until retirement. He died in 1991 at age 73. His grandson found the original aluminum sketch in a box of personal effects. It is now displayed at the PT Boat Museum in Fall River, Massachusetts. Gunner's mate 2nd Class Harold Mitchell fired the first 37mm cannon shot from a PT boat on October 21, 1942. He survived that engagement and 42 more patrols. He transferred to PT 109 in January 1943 as a gunnery instructor, teaching crews how to operate the salvaged cannons effectively. Mitchell received a Bronze Star for actions at Vella La Vella in August 1943. After the war, he worked for Boeing in Seattle. He died in 2006, one of the last surviving members of the original cannon modification team. But the true legacy of these men is not measured in medals or memories. The 37mm cannon remained standard PT boat armament through the end of World War II. 531 PT boats served during the war. By 1945, nearly all of them carried either the original M4, salvaged from aircraft, or the improved M9 designed specifically for naval use. Bureau of Ordnance produced over 1,500 M9 cannons between August 1943 and August 1945. The weapons equipped not only PT boats, but landing craft patrol vessels and coastal defense installations throughout the Pacific and Mediterranean theaters. The tactical doctrine that Lynch developed spread beyond PT boat squadrons. Decoy and strike tactics were adapted for destroyer operations. Close-range cannon engagement protocols influenced post-war naval gunnery training. The concept of using lightweight automatic weapons to neutralize small craft threats became standard doctrine that persists to this day. After World War II, PT boats were retired from American service. The wooden-hulled torpedo boats were too fragile for the jet-age Navy. But the lessons learned from their cannon modifications influenced the development of patrol craft for decades. The swift boats that operated in Vietnam carried weapons designed using principles established in the Solomon Islands. Modern patrol boats mount automatic cannons that trace their lineage directly to the improvised M4 installations of 1942. 800 Japanese vessels were destroyed by PT boats equipped with 37mm cannons during World War II. Daihatsu barges, small freighters, patrol boats, subchasers, landing craft. Each vessel destroyed represented troops that never reached their destinations, supplies that never arrived, reinforcements that never strengthened enemy lines. Conservative estimates suggest that PT boat interdiction operations shortened the Pacific campaign by months. That means thousands of American lives saved because desperate sailors refused to accept that their weapons could not reach the enemy. But the lesson of the devil boats is not about weapons or tactics. Military organizations resist change. This is not a flaw. It is a feature. Procedures exist because they work. Doctrine exists because it has been tested. Regulations exist because uncontrolled innovation creates chaos. The Navy bureaucracy that initially rejected Lynch's modification was not wrong to be cautious. Unauthorized weapons installations can fail catastrophically. Untested equipment can kill crews. The institutional preference for controlled development and approved procurement has saved countless lives over centuries of naval warfare. But procedures can also kill. When doctrine fails to address new threats, when regulations prevent adaptation to changing conditions, when bureaucracy moves slower than the enemy's soldiers and sailors die. The genius of the American military in World War II was not blind obedience to procedure. It was the ability to recognize when procedures had to bend. Commander Calvert authorized an unauthorized modification because his boats were dying. Admiral Turner supported an unproven weapon because his campaign was failing. Bureau of Ordnance approved field expedient equipment because combat results justified the risk. The pattern repeats throughout military history. The tank was rejected by cavalry traditionalists. The aircraft carrier was opposed by battleship admirals. Radar was dismissed by officers who trusted their eyes. Every major military innovation faced institutional resistance before proving itself in combat. The difference between successful and failed innovations often comes down to one factor. Did someone with authority look at the results and say, yes, Lynch was lucky. He had Calvert. He had Turner. He had commanders willing to risk their careers on an unproven idea. Many innovators throughout history have not been so fortunate. Their ideas died in committee. Their modifications were ordered removed. Their improvements were rejected because they violated procedure. We will never know how many wars were lengthened, how many lives were lost because good ideas could not survive the bureaucratic process. And there is one final detail that most histories of PT boats overlook entirely. The last cannon produced for PT boat service rolled off the assembly line at Colt's Hartford factory on August 10, 1945, 5 days before Japan surrendered. The weapon was assigned to PT-809, stationed at Samar in the Philippines. The boat was decommissioned in October 1945 without ever firing that cannon in combat. The weapon was placed in storage at Subic Bay. For decades, its disposition was listed as unknown in Navy records. In 2003, a historian researching PT boat armament discovered that the cannon had been transferred to the Philippine Navy in 1951 as part of a military aid package. The Philippine Navy mounted it on a patrol craft that served for 18 years. When that vessel was decommissioned in 1969, the cannon was donated to a museum in Manila. It sits there today behind glass with a small placard identifying it as an American 37mm naval cannon. The placard does not mention that the weapon's design originated with crashed fighters at Henderson Field. It does not mention Lynch or Coogan or Frey or Mitchell. It does not mention the desperate sailors who built the first mount from scrap steel in a machine shop without electricity. But the weapon remembers. Every weld. Every bearing surface. Every design choice traces back to that October night in 1942, when a 26-year-old lieutenant looked at wrecked aircraft and saw salvation. Of the 531 PT boats that served in World War II, only 12 survive today. 8 are preserved as museum vessels. 4 remain in private ownership. Most retain their 37mm cannon mounts. Some still have operational weapons. PT-61 Sin at Battleship Cove in Fall River, Massachusetts, displays a functional M9 on its bow. The mount is the factory standard design. But the factory standard was built on a foundation of improvisation, desperation, and courage. From a 26-year-old electrical engineer with an idea that everyone called impossible to 800 enemy vessels destroyed and a strategic campaign won. Robert Lynch and his crew proved that innovation does not require permission, that good ideas can come from anywhere, that desperate men with wrenches and welding torches can change the course of history. The Japanese called them devil boats, green dragons, demon vessels with aircraft guns. But they were just wooden boats with salvaged weapons, crewed by ordinary men who refused to accept that the impossible was actually impossible. If this story moved you, there are hundreds more like it buried in the archives of World War II. Farmers who invented new tactics, mechanics who modified weapons, cooks who became heroes. The forgotten innovators who won the war not through grand strategy, but through stubborn refusal to accept defeat. The devil boats are gone now. The men who crewed them are almost all gone, but their legacy remains in every modern patrol craft that carries an automatic cannon, in every military organization that learns to balance procedure with adaptation, in every young officer who looks at a problem and sees a solution that nobody else can imagine. 800 vessels, thousands of lives, one impossible idea. That is the power of innovation under fire. That is the story of the devil boats. And that is why 80 years later, we still remember the night a crashed fighter's cannon roared across the black waters of the Solomon Islands and changed everything.